Before his death, Ken Curtis, the beloved actor who played Festus Hagen on Gunsmoke, carried a secret list that shocked even the people closest to him. For decades, he was seen as the easygoing, loyal sidekick, a man who brought warmth, humor, and heart to one of television's greatest westerns. But behind the scenes, Ken Curtis wasn't always the friendly, patient cowboy fans imagined. In his final years, long after the cameras stopped rolling and the old Hollywood masks began to fall away, Ken finally admitted there were a handful of actors he truly couldn't stand. Actors who pushed him, betrayed him, or made his career harder in ways the public never knew. These weren't simple disagreements. They were deep personal resentments that stretched across years of filming, studio politics, casting battles, and painful professional rivalries. And for the first time, near the end of his life, Curtis opened up about the 5 names he wished he had never worked with. Men he believed were arrogant, manipulative, or downright cruel. Some were famous household names. Others were quietly powerful men who sabotaged careers while smiling for the cameras. But each one, according to Curtis, left a mark he never forgot. Why did he stay silent for so long? Why did he wait until the end to reveal the truth? And what exactly happened between him and these actors that made him carry that bitterness until his final days? This is the story of Ken Curtis's real Hollywood, the one fans never saw, and the one he finally exposed when he had nothing left to lose. Ken Curtis was never the kind of actor who chased controversy, but the bitterness he carried toward one particular co-star began long before he ever became a household name. In the early years of his career, long before Gunsmoke made him famous, Ken worked alongside an actor who treated him like nothing more than a background prop. This man, whose name audiences would come to recognize instantly, was already established, already powerful, and already comfortable using his status to remind younger actors of their place. Ken never forgot how he was spoken to, dismissed, and even mocked on set simply because he wasn't a star yet. The experience was humiliating, but it also taught him something about Hollywood. Fame doesn't always make people better. Sometimes, it only makes their worst traits louder. Ken never publicly named the man at the time, but privately, he referred to him as the first actor I ever hated. The resentment didn't come from jealousy. Ken wasn't the type. It came from disrespect. The man had laughed at his accent, mocked his attempts to get lines right, and even told him to stick to singing instead of acting. For a while, Ken tried to laugh it off. But the more he grew in the industry, the more he realized this actor had a pattern of treating his co-stars like disposable tools. When Ken later became successful, he was offered a chance to work with him again, and he refused without hesitation. "I'd rather turn down the job," he reportedly said, "than work one more day with him." It was a rare moment of defiance in a business where actors are usually forced to swallow their pride. Years later, the situation repeated itself on a far bigger scale, this time on the set of Gunsmoke. While most of the cast embraced Ken with open arms, there was one actor whose ego clashed with him from the very beginning. The tension didn't start with an argument. It started with a silent rivalry. This actor didn't appreciate how beloved Ken's character Festus was becoming, especially because Festus was never meant to be more than a supporting role. But audiences adored him. Letters poured in. Festus was funny, loyal, unpredictable, and real in a way few characters on TV were. And as his popularity grew, so did the quiet resentment behind the scenes. Ken noticed it immediately. There were moments when scenes were suddenly rewritten, jokes were removed, and screen time was shifted. Not because of story needs, but because someone didn't like how much the audience was responding to him. More than once, Ken heard from crew members that the actor had gone to producers privately to complain about Festus getting too much attention. Ken never confronted him about it directly. He didn't need to. The silence spoke louder. One man was jealous. The other kept working. Most fans never knew how competitive, political, and territorial the set of a long-running show could be. Actors who smiled for magazine covers could turn cold as stone when the cameras stopped. Ken Curtis wasn't interested in power games, but he could feel when someone wished he weren't there. Years later, when asked whether he missed everyone from the Gunsmoke cast, he paused. and carefully told the truth without telling the name. Almost everyone, he said. That was the second name added to his private list. Unlike the first man, this one wasn't openly cruel. He was quietly dismissive, strategically competitive, and, in Ken's words, the kind of actor who only liked you when you were beneath him. And the moment Festus became too big to ignore, the moment Ken stopped being the new guy and became the audience favorite, the divide was permanent. And yet, Ken never complained publicly. He never exposed the rivalry, but near the end of his life, when the masks of Hollywood finally fell away, he finally acknowledged what so many suspected. The third name on Ken Curtis's list came from a very different kind of betrayal. One that didn't happen on a film set, but in the business deals happening behind closed doors. Before Gunsmoke, Ken was part of a rising wave of television actors who were promised roles, contracts, and career paths that sounded solid, only to discover that the industry could take everything back without warning. Ken once signed onto a project he believed would finally give him a leading role, something he had worked toward for years. The producers seemed supportive, the network was enthusiastic, and Ken was ready, until one actor stepped in and took it all away with a single phone call. This man wasn't just another performer. He was someone with influence, someone who knew how to get what he wanted by presenting himself as the bigger name. He had heard that Ken Curtis had been cast, and instead of congratulating him, he went behind the scenes and demanded the role for himself. The producers didn't hesitate. Ken was replaced before he even filmed one scene. No explanation, no apology, just a call informing him that the direction had changed. And when Ken later learned the truth, he didn't feel anger first. He felt stunned that another actor would stoop so low just to prove he was still dominant in the industry. That was when resentment turned into something deeper. Ken later said the man smiled in public and stole in private, a description so sharp that people close to him instantly knew who he meant. That moment didn't just cost Ken a role, it cost him trust. From that point on, he learned that Hollywood friendships were often built on convenience, and when fame, money, or power entered the picture, masks fell fast. The experience hardened him, not into someone bitter, but into someone who finally understood why so many older actors warned him to never let the business change who you are. He didn't add the man's name to his list out of spite. He added it because some things deserve to be remembered, even if they are never spoken out loud. The fourth name came from even closer to home, a man Ken worked with repeatedly, a man he once respected, admired, and even defended. But time has a way of revealing character. This actor was friendly in public, but nobody forgot the day Ken saw him turn on a younger actor, humiliating him for missing a line and mocking him until he walked off set shaking. Ken never forgot the look on that young man's face. It reminded him of what he went through in his early days, the belittling, the insults, the laughter at someone trying their best. Ken stepped in privately, but the damage was done. The actor wasn't just arrogant. He was cruel when the cameras weren't rolling. That was when Ken made a decision. Fame never gives you permission to treat people as less than you. And anyone who acts like it does eventually reveals who they really are. Ken never confronted him publicly because he didn't want a scandal or a career-ending feud. But when someone later asked him if there was anyone in the business he regretted working with, he only said, "I regret knowing him more than working with him." Ken never forgot cruelty, not because he held grudges, but because he believed that if a person shows you who they are, you're a fool to forget it. 4 names were on the list now. 4 men who had shaped his experience of Hollywood not through kindness, but through betrayal, jealousy, ego, and cruelty. And yet one name remained, the one he saved for last. The one that, according to him, hurt the most and taught the most. And that final name wasn't just another actor he disliked. It was someone the public never would have suspected. Someone fans still praise today. Someone Ken waited years to expose. The 5th and final name on Ken Curtis's list was the one that shocked people the most. Not because the man was cruel or openly hostile, but because he had built a public image of kindness, humility, and integrity. For years, fans believed the two were close friends, united by the same projects, the same era of television, and the same love for classic Western storytelling. But behind the scenes, Ken saw a different version of him, a version that operated quietly, politically, and without hesitation when it came to protecting his position in the industry. This wasn't someone who yelled, insulted, or mocked. This was someone who moved pieces behind the curtain, subtly shifting opportunities away from anyone who posed a threat to his spotlight. Ken only discovered the truth when he learned that this actor, this so-called friend, had blocked him from being considered for a role that would have reshaped his post-Gunsmoke career. The studio liked Ken, the director wanted him, but then a phone call was made and suddenly the role was no longer available. The reason? The actor didn't want Ken associated with his project because, in his words, he still carries that Festus look. It wasn't just rejection. It was elitism disguised as professionalism. Ken didn't lash out or make a public scene. He simply added the man's name to the list, not out of hatred, but as a reminder that even the most likable faces in Hollywood could operate on selfish instinct. Ken once said, "I didn't hate him for what he did to me. I hated that he did it while shaking my hand." That line told everyone the truth. Betrayal hurts worst when it comes from someone who pretended to be on your side. Fans would never have guessed it. They saw red carpets, smiles, handshakes, co-star stories told to talk show hosts. But Hollywood friendships were often built on necessity, not loyalty. Ken learned that late in life, when the spotlight was no longer blinding, when the studios stopped calling, and when truth finally mattered more than image, that was when he admitted that the real wounds of the entertainment world weren't caused by rivals. They were caused by people who pretended to be allies. What made his confession so powerful wasn't the names themselves, but the timing. Ken waited until he was older, until he no longer depended on the industry, until the fear of backlash no longer mattered. He spoke from a place of honesty earned through age, loss, and perspective. He wasn't trying to destroy reputations. He was trying to finally release the things he had carried for too long, the disappointments, the betrayals, the unspoken truths. But even with the bitterness, Ken Curtis never let those 5 men define his legacy. He still remained the actor who brought Festus to life, who gave television one of the most iconic sidekicks of all time, who showed that loyalty, humor, and simplicity could make a character unforgettable. He didn't want to be remembered for his anger. He wanted to be remembered for surviving it, and that was the difference between Ken and the men on his list. They chased power. He chased purpose. They protected their status. He protected his character. They left trails of resentment. He left a legacy of warmth and authenticity that still resonates with audiences decades later. The truth about Ken Curtis wasn't that he hated 5 actors. The truth was that he spent a lifetime being patient, humble, and kind in an industry that rewarded the opposite. And in his final years, he finally allowed himself to say what he never said when cameras were rolling. Being a good man in a bad business doesn't make you weak. It just makes you different. In the last years of his life, Ken Curtis wasn't interested in fame, Hollywood politics, or trying to rewrite the past. He spent his time with family, close friends, and the people who had known him long before anyone ever called him Festus. He didn't attend many industry events anymore, didn't chase interviews, and didn't try to stay connected to a town that had already replaced him with younger faces and faster fame. But the people who visited him in those later years described something unexpected. Not a man filled with anger or regret, but someone who finally understood the difference between success and meaning. Ken had worked with legends, lived through television history, and built a character millions still remember with affection. And yet what he talked about most wasn't the show, the money, or the fame. It was the lessons. He told stories about the actors who helped him, not just the ones who hurt him. He spoke about the crew members who treated him kindly when he was still learning. He remembered the extras who often worked harder than the stars and never got the credit. That was who Ken really admired, not the powerful but the genuine. He said that the industry was full of actors who wanted to be icons, not people, and that was what separated the forgettable from the unforgettable. Some people chased attention. Others earned respect without asking for it. Ken believed the audience always knew the difference, even when Hollywood didn't. A close friend recalled one of Ken's final conversations, where he admitted that the 5 men he disliked were not the biggest part of his life. They had simply taken up more space in his memory than they deserved. He didn't name them to destroy them. He named them so the truth would not be buried with him. He didn't want people to believe that every smiling face in the industry was genuine. He wanted the next generation of actors to understand that talent alone doesn't protect you. Character does. Ken Curtis died with something most actors never get: a legacy built on love, not spotlight. He wasn't the leading man, he wasn't the studio favorite, and he wasn't the loudest personality in the room. But he was the one audiences trusted, the one who felt real, the one who didn't need to pretend to be someone else when the cameras shut off. And decades later, people still watch Festus with the same affection as they did the first time. Not because the show was popular, but because Ken made the character human. That was the real difference between Ken Curtis and the actors he resented. Their fame faded. Their careers ended. Their names are often remembered only by critics or nostalgia buffs. But Ken? His character still lives in reruns. His voice still echoes in Western conventions and fan events. His stories are still told by people who worked beside him, not because he was perfect, but because he was decent. Something rare enough in Hollywood to be remembered forever. In the end, Ken Curtis didn't want revenge, and he didn't want sympathy. He wanted honesty. He wanted people to know that even kind men have breaking points. Even good men carry anger, and even gentle souls can be wounded by ego, power, and jealousy. But he also wanted the world to see that those things don't have to define you. His final message, the one he repeated more than once, was simple. Don't waste your life trying to impress the people who wouldn't care if you disappeared. Spend it with the ones who would notice if you were gone. And that is why, long after Hollywood forgot him, the audience never did.